Does anyone else work on water right now or have an interest in working in water? What is your focus?
Focus right now is on gray water.
Gray water.
That we use different configurations and redirections within say apartments and condos especially.
So at the distributed level, creating a secondary circuit of water that feeds all the way up to the system, or is it just an isolated?
Mostly local, but we're looking at different solutions.
Okay. Very interesting. Love to hear more.
Work for a company that does revenue and conservation analytics for water utilities.
So the utilities pay for it? And what is it for, like board presentations on projected revenue? Or
So it's a combination. So some of it is for kind of key performance indicators that would be used for senior management. Some of it's really tactical around, for instance, on the revenue side, what Gigi was talking about with data leaks. So different types of meter misreads that could go out to the field crew saying, here's 1,000 potential meter misreads that happened this month. Let's go check the accuracy of those and even integrate it into ArcGIS, which Gigi said it later, like, oh, and here's the route that the folks should take to check out those leaks.
interesting. So that's called
Valor
Valor.
Water Analytics.
We're actually working.
Okay, great. Well, now McGee is going to show us the big picture and lead us into our conversation. So, would you like to slide? You want me to change them? Or so I can
Yeah, you can do it.
move on?
So, thanks for coming. My name is McGee Young. I'm the founder and CEO of Meter Hero. So let's see. One of the great things about being a startup CEO is that you can have contrarian opinions, and it's Wednesday, I think. It's Wednesday night, and you guys are taking your evening to come listen to us talk, so you should be treated to some contrarian opinions to make things worth your while. So things that we believe that nobody else believes, that it's in the near future, it's going to be cheaper for you to acquire your own water and energy than it is going to be to acquire from your utility. That when we're talking about water and big data, we're talking about things that aren't part of the same conversation. Water and big data do not go together. And it is our job to start thinking about how to make them go together if we're going to capture value around water. We don't believe that conservation should be defined by your utility's profit motive or their budget. So when you conserve, your bill goes down. Your bill is a function of the profit chain that leads up to the delivery of that water or energy. And so when you conserve, you save whatever the bill decides that that's worth. We don't believe that the water in the reservoirs or the coal that gets left in the ground should be defined by the value that's assigned to it by your utility bill. So what we're trying to do is to rethink the notion of a utility, and not a utility that sells you more water and energy, but a utility that puts value around conservation in and of itself, that creates an abstraction layer around water and energy that's independent of the delivery of that resource. So there's some contrary opinions, mic drop. What does that mean for big data? So the way that I think about this is I go back to my grandmother's job over here, switching the telephone connections. And those were the old circuits. That was, literally a telephone circuit. And you would have to call an operator to get, to the person that you were trying to talk to. The circuit was the thing of value and not the conversation that passed back and forth between you within that circuit. Right? It's like a dedicated lane on the highway. That becomes really valuable if you're going across, say, the Golden Gate Bridge during rush hour, and not necessarily the traffic that's going across it. Nowadays, that room is being operated by that guy, and the circuits or the communication infrastructure is valuable to some extent, but not really compared to the data packets that are being transmitted between those certain points, right? So when we're thinking about big data, we're thinking about the data packets that get transmitted within some physical infrastructure. When we're thinking about water and energy for the most part, we're thinking really about circuits and not packets. So here's a mental challenge for you guys who are doing data. How do you conceptualize water and energy in terms of packets and not circuits? What does the abstraction layer look like when we're thinking about water and energy in that way? So that's where I want to kind of go with this tonight. Love to get some, feedback, thoughts from the audience on this, because I'm mostly, as the startup CEO, I just make it up as I go along, and so this is kind of our concept, and we want to roll with it. So let's. So this is kind of the way that I think about it. We have this physical layer of water. This is a city. This is a mid-sized city in the middle of the country. Does anybody recognize it? This is the pipe layout. You'll kick yourself when I tell you the answer. Austin, Texas. There you go. So that's Austin. That's the river runs through downtown there, and this is the reservoir up there. And this is actually from an academic article on the value of urban density for groundwater, for improving groundwater stores, because the pipes leak so much that actually in urban areas, groundwater reserves tend to do better because of the amount of city leakage that happens. So Austin is pretty good. They only leak about 10%. Maybe the data is lying to us, but the academics tend to think that 10% of water that's produced for consumption in Austin gets lost before it reaches its final destination. In Fort Worth, it's 20%. So this is what, when we're studying sort of the physical layer of water, that's what we're studying. But over here is our now, infamous drought map. This is an abstracted layer of water, right? This is based on data that's been abstracted from the actual water itself. And it's a way for us to conceptualize the lack of water. It's a really simple abstracted layer, but it's a start for us to think about what does it mean for us not to have water in the places that we want it? What's the value around that absence of water or the presence of water? Where I used to live in the Midwest, where the combined sewage overflows were a big problem and not the scarcity of water, they're banking their economic resurgence on the presence of water. At least this is an abstraction that's related to economic development. So the challenges that we face when working with water utilities, among others, is that this is what we think that the water utility control center would probably look like. And at East Bay Mud, I'm sure it actually does look much like that. And San Francisco probably, but this is the reality of most of the water utilities that I've been to. C:\prompt. What was the, and I have 54,000 utilities on my slide. Nobody really knows actually how many water utilities exist because there's so many and they're so small for the most part. They don't have the resources. So when you're trying to abstract a data layer out of the utilities, there's literally very little that you can get in terms of data about water from water utilities. So the very organizations that we might rely upon to make economic arguments, to make technological arguments, don't have the capacity to serve us. So what do we do to overcome that? As Cedric mentioned in the introduction, we actually pay people to save water and energy. So I spend my days logging into your utility accounts for you, figuring out your bills for you, abstracting that data out of your bills and putting it into our system so that there's a uniform and easy to understand translation of the data that's in your bills. We build upon that basic data layer by assigning economic value to that data. So we work with big businesses for the most part, but some small businesses too, that want to improve water conservation and have a sustainability mission. They fund rebates, cash rebates, for people to save water and energy. We do the calculations of the savings and they give us the money to hand out. We're sort of like Robin Hood, except for the rich are voluntarily giving us their money so that they can prove that they're committed to water conservation and fighting climate change, and also, hey, have you seen our new product? I mean, it's part of the business, right? But it's an abstraction layer above the water, the physical water infrastructure itself. We don't work with any one particular water utility. I log into about 400 different water utilities on a daily basis and look at the data coming out of each one. And when we can standardize that, much like these guys are doing, try to standardize that data so that it doesn't matter if you live in Buffalo or Austin or Oakland, that your data is just as important as somebody else's data, then we can all start working together to solve challenges like drought and climate change. Right? Then we're not subject to, hey, my utility is really progressive and awesome. I live in East Bay Mud District 2, and it's incredible. Right? I'm like blessed with one of the best water utilities in the country, but it's not fair to people who live in Fresno County who get a paper bill once a quarter with 7 on it as their usage. It doesn't even tell you what 7 means. Like, is it hundreds of cubic feet? Is it thousands of gallons? We don't know. And that's not fair that the person in Fresno gets disempowered that way. So we're trying to make an equal playing field for everybody to be able to contribute to conservation. So we're just the last point, we're really small compared to these guys. We just launched or came out of beta in April. So 3,500 individual accounts, 7,500 meters. I can't wait till we have like millions, and neither can Rebecca. But it's exciting to see how we can start thinking beyond the traditional model of building software for a utility, right? The O-Power, I love what these guys are doing, but how can we think differently? How can we think bigger than the traditional infrastructure that we've been handed? How can we, do packets and not circuits? So, questions for you guys to kind of open up the discussion. There are 3 challenges that we face, on a daily basis when we try to do water and energy data. First of all, what do you measure? So this is kind of an interesting question. You think about water. Do you measure the flow of water? That's just like how much is going through a particular, think about like a river. It has a flow, and you measure that flow or through a pipe. Do you measure how much you use? So farmers use 80% of the water in California. What does that even mean for a farmer to use water relative to, say, like us? Is that consumption the same kind of thing? Or is it volume? Is it acre feet, which is what the water utilities like to, and the state likes to measure water in? Like how much, literally like across an acre of land, how many feet deep would the water be? We don't even know how to start measuring water, which is a big challenge. Management. So water utilities and for the most part electric utilities are monopolies. I thought I saw, is there a Solar City person in here? No Solar City. We have some family, Solar City family right over here at Tesla. But we're trying to break that on the physical side, break that monopoly of who can provide you with water and energy. But should the same monopoly rules that apply to the provision of the resource itself apply to the data? Right? Should they own all of the data? We don't know if that's the best way to manage data around water and energy. We suspect that there could be better ways of managing water and energy data aside from within the utility. And the last thing is monetization. And so this is a really interesting issue where we sort of accept that there's, Wes was talking about the dam builders who probably hate you guys, I bet. I mean, that's like, if you think about like your mortal enemy is, Halliburton that wants to build, another dam, or I'm in the Kaiser building in Oakland. They built the Hoover Dam, right? hate you. So, and me, I mean, all of us who try to work on conservation, but we don't question that they can make money building more infrastructure. We don't question that Badger Meter is the largest manufacturer of water meters in the country, and they're a $700 million company, big, huge, profitable company on our backs. But when we want to monetize conservation, everybody goes, oh, no, you can't make money off of doing good things for people. Like, that's not okay. And the utility, frankly, for the most part, wants to sell you more water and energy. I mean, even in the drought, most utilities in California are kind of going, when's it going to rain? We need people to start watering their lawns again. There's a huge hole in East Bay Mud's revenue right now because of their success in conservation. There's huge conflicts of interest around this that we have to think about for business models. The last question is sort of like, the question of like, why are we here? Should we disrupt the water sector? For the libertarians in the audience, is this the role of technology to disrupt this old, 19th century institution so that we can face 21st century challenges, or should we try to evolve these old institutions and contain them and maintain them and get them up to speed for the 21st century? That's an interesting question just to talk about from a technology and startup point of view, and happy to get going on any of those. So thanks for your time tonight, also for turning out. This is really a treat for all of us, and we appreciate you taking your time.
Thank you. So, listening to you, it definitely sounds like what I hear in the energy sector, where we're moving towards this transactive energy platform where distributed energy resources are traded at different levels, and it's much easier to conceptualize when you think about a solar panel and a battery on the end of the line, and some of the challenges that the utility would have in accessing that and justify it. But when we talk about water, just the physical characteristics of water, its weight, the infrastructure that's needed, the necessity to cover all ratepayers or all citizens, how would you address that in your marketplace framework?
So I think it's the height of silliness that we use half of our water in this state, our drinking water, to flood our lawns twice a week, right? So the price of water is not in any way connected to the value of water. To me, like for starters, there's an opportunity here to change the type of water that we use for different types of purposes. So we can use fairly well treated water to water, it's not drinking water probably, to water our lawns with, right? That's completely plausible. In Milwaukee, we have a district set up that's got purple pipes that uses gray water recycling. So purple pipes you have the clean water pipes and the poopy water pipes, and then you have the purple pipes that have non-potable but usable water in them. In San Francisco, we have a purple pipe system, and all new buildings, high-rise buildings in downtown San Francisco have to have rainwater catchment systems that recirculate that water for toilets and other purposes. So we can start to disaggregate how we use water and then price it appropriately for its uses. We have technologies to recycle water in our homes. And you were talking about gray water. The Nexus e-water recycling system is being installed into new housing developments right now. These technologies are around the corner, and we'll be able to then harness them for our own purposes in a relatively short amount of time.
So I guess the question now for Gigi, for you is, are you focused on that? Are you focused on the segmentation of that water use for the customer? Do you look at trying to influence the way, obviously the lawn came up a few times, but do you have that granular information on how much water people use for different activities?
Actually, I don't think I haven't thought about it that much. I know, the reuse of water
So what we do at WaterSmart, we do two things around detecting kind of where water's going and how to recommend, based on that, what to do in the home. So the first is if you have a smart meter, so if you have interval data, 15-minute interval data, we can actually detect patterns in your usage to be able to pull out some sort of insight from that usage to say when you're watering your lawn. And we can send you a nice little reminder to say, hey, there's 2 days a week watering restrictions in your neighborhood, you're watering 7 days a week, maybe you should reconsider that before you get fined $500 a day. We're not going to issue the fine, but we want to just encourage people and educate them because many people don't know. They set an irrigation timer and never think about it. And so we often will recommend to those sorts of customers based on the information we know about their home, how big their yard is, the pattern of data that we can see. We'll recommend to those people that they either replace their grass, that they consider some sort of gray water type system using alternate water supplies, or that they just rip out their grass and install some sort of new system with the Cash for Grass repaint. But in addition to that, if we don't have interval data, we're able to tell based on seasonal patterns of usage. Typically indoors you use about the same amount of water throughout the year, but if it's hot and dry during the summer and wet during the winter, you're going to water typically a different amount throughout that period. And so if we don't have that interval data, we're still able to pull out what percentage of your water based on these models that we've developed is going outdoors, and so we can give you recommendations that are specific to you based on that information.
Is that the type of thing that we would find out on the Fathom store? Is that the type of applications that could be developed?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the type of application that will go in the Fathom store is across all operational needs. So anything that deals with recycling of water, if there's a particular application that looks at flows, zones of pressure, or any operational aspects of it, that application can fit into the Fathom store, access the data it needs in order to run for that particular utility. So the Fathom store is really open to all different types of technologies.
So if I'm an app developer and I sign up on that store and I decide to develop an app, I can get somehow access to 5 million
Yes.
meters,
Yeah.
15-minute intervals, and
Well, not all of them are on 15-minute
Yeah.
intervals, but whatever meters or Fathom is installed on today, whatever utilities it's installed on, as soon as we do an integration with your app, then immediately it's available for all of those utilities to try it. So we've pre-integrated with you so that you have access to all the data that you normally would have to request from the utility.
okay, so the utility would use the app. Is that the idea?
Yes,
Because
yes.
I'm thinking it from the App Store
Yes, think of
perspective,
it.
where the user would be accessing that, and a developer could develop an app for whole California water users, basically.
Well, so we have apps that are like mobile apps that the end user would actually use, but the utility might play a role in that. But the majority of the apps will be for the utility.
Okay.
I mean, it could even be any kind of technology, like use sensor technology to collect more information, to do more analysis. That would also go in the answer. And think of the utility as you with your iPhone. So it's making the purchasing decisions. We'll have a search engine so that you can start to look at the different functions. I think there's some.
Okay.
So I actually worked with a utility that's using Fathom software, and one of the issues for the end users, the residents, it's a pilot study, so people are hesitant to actually participate in the pilot study because they're worried about where their data is going, and they don't want people watching them. How do you address that?
Well, I mean, no one's going to see the data for that particular end user except that end user. If someone else is looking at that information, but they won't know who the end user is. In other words, we anonymize all the data. So there's really no breach there.
So that's from your point of view, but from the resident and the end user, they're worried about it. So somehow the industry needs to address it, that there actually is not, it's anonymized, and because I think it's just kind of a balancing.
Yeah, it is. And I think all three of us will have to are dealing with that. And I think more education, provide more education to the public.
Well,
about-
especially if there's a threat of fine or something, as we're hearing nowadays,
Yeah.
thinking
The
that that
smart
data is
meters.
being made widely available.
Smart meters.
Yeah.
And a lot of paranoia.
Yes, I think Cedric, you have,
Yeah, maybe we should.
you want to do another one?
I've got one
You have
behind.
one,
Yeah.
okay, great. Let's move on. Thank you.
So, what the residence is, what granular is it in real time, and how are you collecting that? For the electric grid, there is an AMI infrastructure, so, I mean, are you able to see every minute, every second what the water consumption is? How's that really connected?
Are you saying how, I'm sorry, did I understand your question? You were saying how are we collecting that data? Like in what
Yeah,
technology?
what is the infrastructure available to collect the data? Because electric grid already has this AMI technology, the Wi-Fi connection to the transformers.
Yes.
How are you doing that for the water users? And how granular is it? How often are you able to look at it?
It's very similar to the electric meters. The main difference between the electric meters and the water meters is water meters have to rely on a battery, so they don't have, Wi-Fi will probably be too much of a power consumption for the battery meters. So they use different types of radio technologies to collect that data. And most of them that I'm seeing are about hourly data. If you're doing AMI, you can go to 15-minute bucket data. But again, the battery, we've grown accustomed to having 20-year life battery on the meters themselves, so we're very careful with how much data we can pass through. But usually with these AMI, because I used to work for a company called Census, and they developed the meters. I think they're the world's largest water meter company. And you can always do on demand. You can collect data even more frequently than 15-minute bucket if you want to, but you just have to conserve the battery life for those meters. Did that answer your question? It's just different radio technology stacks, et cetera.
The infrastructure already exists to actually connect to me from the
No, you usually have, like, I know at Census we have to install, base stations and towers, and so a lot of times you have to install your own technology, but in some cases they might be using cellular. It's very high energy consumption, but in some cases they might be doing that. Is anyone else?
And there's plenty of conversations around, can we leverage the infrastructure built out by the energy sector, right? But ultimately, there's very little overlap between energy utility, electricity and gas, and a water utility. So for example, there's 3 energy utilities in California that cover about 90% of the state. And I think it probably would take 1,000 water utilities in California to cover 90% of the state. So there's often not much of an overlap there. So the infrastructure has to be built out anew, or it has to be standardized in a way that could sit on top of energy infrastructure that's already in place.
I have a question, just a picture. How much water consumption actually goes through utilities? In the agricultural sector, a lot of landowners drill right to the water table, and that represents a very significant proportion of the consumption. Secondarily, in the markets you're addressing, going toward individual users, that consumption can be reflected in terms of what the individual consumes. Buy a chicken, that has a certain amount of water value. Buy a bag of almonds, that has a certain amount. Is there any, I just wanted to run that by your expertise on this. I think it's a big issue.
Absolutely. So I'll just start and let you guys hop in. One of the big challenges with water is that it's hard to know how much water is being used by different sectors. I used to work for a consulting firm that worked with the DWR and the Public Utilities Commission to try to figure out how much energy was used to push water around the state. And it's a lot. But one of the big challenges that we found was that the DWR had a rough idea of how much water was being used in different hydrological regions, but they were able to derive most of that data, especially from the farming community, based on how much crop was sold. So they were backing out of this information because the water wasn't actually, to your point, passing through a utility. That farmer was pulling it out of a canal or drilling their own well. So there's definitely a challenge here in figuring out really how much water is being used by different sectors and how much water is being extracted and how much water is discretionary versus waste. It's certainly a big challenge that we've seen, but from our end we are laser focused on these municipal water utilities, the potable water that goes through the pipes in the cities, because ultimately that is maybe a small amount of the consumed water in the state. It's still significant, but ultimately a gallon that we save in San Francisco is a gallon that we continue to have in San Francisco. It's not one of those things that necessarily a gallon we save in San Francisco immediately goes down to San Diego. It's not quite like electricity in the sense that it will move that fast.
That actually brings us to a point that we mentioned discussing is we imagine water utilities as sort of these old systems, 1,000 customers, a bunch of paper bills. But really, when you think about the amount of water, they're operating a market where they have supply and demand. And on the demand side, obviously there's a recent shift with the preservation. There's a 25% dip. But on the supply side, there's a huge swing. I think it goes from 100 million cubic acres or whatever the amount is to 140. So there's like a 40% shift from one year to the next. And my experience is more in the energy sector, and we have this peak load prediction, and we look at it 10 years ahead, and we calculate, and we build our infrastructure out to meet that peak. But how, these old businesses with very old operations, I'm not talking about these big municipal utilities, but all the others, how do you operate a business like that where you have no idea where your supply is going to come from? Can you elaborate on like the business model and how we might be able to brainstorm collectively on changing that?
There is not a business model. Like these are public utilities that are government agencies. So it's a government agency model, and they are regulated by the CPUC ultimately, and so their rates are set through rate hearings, and their allocations are set through various purchasing agreements. So this is an organizational model, and it actually works fairly well. We've grown California. Charles Fishman had a great piece on this in the New York Times over the weekend that California is winning the drought, except for the fish, who are all dying. But if you just look at the human side, our reservoirs are down, but that's sort of the point. When it hasn't rained for 4 years, if the reservoirs were still full after a 4-year drought, we'd be doing something wrong. We'd be wasting a lot of resources on keeping reservoirs unnecessarily full. So the system is working exactly as it was supposed to, and fairly well. We're cutting back during the time of crisis. The question really is this a system that we want to go, to take with us for the next 40 years? Right? Is this a resilience system? Is this one that will handle a 10-year drought or floods over the winter? Is this centralized management the best way to be sustainable in the 21st century? And I think that's more of the open question that we're trying to address.
But there are examples of huge companies that have come into the United States, taken over whole cities, decided to operate the water system, and then there's a huge crisis, and they pull out, and everyone hates it. There are a few examples, like I didn't say that, but a huge French group that has been involved in these cities.
The voters kick them out, right? This is the problem, is that these are our utilities, and we keep our rates low, and we democracy works wonders, and when a private utility comes in, they can be the scapegoat, and I think Shakespeare said our fault is not in our stars, but in ourselves, and we sort of made the system for ourselves. The question is, do we want to continue this system, or do we want to try to change it somehow? And change is really hard and uncomfortable for everybody involved.
So just to build on that real quick. So I think think you're absolutely right, and I think in many ways the utility industry has been a victim of its own success. We built an amazing set of infrastructure, especially here in California. What we've done is probably an abomination in a sense, right? I mean, we've moved so much water and built a capacity in the system to handle the state of this size, which was never intended by the normal cycle of weather and normal resource system. So I think it's worth saying that this industry has been incredibly successful, and in that, we've stopped paying attention to it. Because they're public entities, because they're public works, we've stopped really thinking about it. We just figure, okay, it's going to be fine. It's always been fine, which is why we're underinvesting in infrastructure and seeing some of those casualties in burst pipes. LA, I think, every month now has a news story about millions of gallons being leaked into the street from a burst pipe. This is very, very common and becoming increasingly common, especially on the East Coast where you have still wooden pipes in the ground. It's kind of a crazy idea that there's wooden submerged pipes on the East Coast, and that's where your water's coming from. But just on the point of business models real quick, I think there is some interesting innovation that's actually been pulled from the energy industry in some of the private water that we're seeing throughout the U.S., actually particularly on the East Coast as well. But this idea of decoupling, right, separating profits from the sales in water allows for a private water company to